English term corresponding to German Ausgangssperre. I'm a native German speaker looking for the correct term for a condition. When people are restricted from leaving their homes, German, Ausgangssperre. For example, in the case of a virus outbreak, I'd have picked the term curfew, and my favorite online dictionary agrees with me. But I got told by a native English speaker that she'd expect that to be only a nighttime thing. A suggested term from her was confinement, but that sounds prisonish to me. What are the correct English terms for German Ausgangssperre? Extra information which might be helpful for people who are not native German speakers. Ausgangssperre in German implies compulsion. Does not imply a reason. It could be military, civil unrest, dangerous animals, disease, weather, and so on. Does not imply a certain time of the day. Has a negative vibe to it.
In English, curfew refers to a time imposed by the authorities where you can't be on the streets after a certain time at night. You can travel all you want during the day, but you can't be outside at night after curfew, a given time starting in the evening. Presumably curfew lasts until daybreak. If you're over at a friend's place, you'll have to stay there. You can't go out until morning. I suppose a curfew could be for any time of the day, but the first thought is that it is for nighttime. The rule is imposed for as long as the authorities say, while you're still under occupation or you're still a teenager. The invaders imposed a curfew to help prevent local insurrection. When I was 16, my parents gave me a curfew of 11 p.m. so I wouldn't stay out too late and get into trouble. If you break curfew, you may be arrested. Curfew has the negative connotation of oppression and being punitive. Quarantine refers to the condition of being kept in a single place while you're sick or infectious. Quarantine may be at a hospital, medical facility, or at one's own home. You can't leave all day every day until the doctor says so, which could be for days or weeks. People with tuberculosis need to be kept in quarantine until antibiotics have cured them. Leaving quarantine is not nominally a civil offense, but it is a medical hazard. Quarantine has the negative connotation of being sick and communicable. It's not a punitive measure. You didn't do anything to deserve it. It's not a punishment. Shelter in place is a recent phrasing, to me at least, used by authorities as a recommendation. Maybe it is just a euphemism for an order to stay at home. The black bear was seen walking into the neighborhood coffee shop. Until the animal control people have captured the bear, please shelter in place. It should take no longer than 2 hours. Shelter in place has only the slightest negative connotation in that something bad must be going on to need it. But there's no panic involved because you're just waiting. Quarantine and curfew are nearby but would never be confused in English. Quarantine is for sickness and is continuous. Curfew is for police control and is, usually, just for nighttime. What I've found as translation for Ausgangssperre on Leo was curfew, but it seems like you can use the German word for other things like quarantine, though the translation of quarantine they give to German is the transparent quarantine.
I'd suggest lockdown. It has certain prison-y connotations, but definitely has the negative slightly ambiguous you must obey style vibe.
The Oxford Duden German Dictionary Oxford University Press 1998 edition translates Ausgangssperre as curfew, for Soldaten for soldiers, confinement to barracks. No mention here is made of quarantine, for which there is a German word quarantine. However, in the comments following the question, at Robusto and I would appear to be in agreement that the English word quarantine does not necessarily imply compulsion. Hence, there would not seem to be a single English word which means enforced quarantine. The word internment exists in English, German Internierung, but the OED indicates this as for political or military purposes. It means detention without trial. However, I have never heard the word internment used for compulsory quarantine. So I think the best English translation in the circumstances would be to resort to two words, compulsory quarantine. Why do they not use the word quarantine rather than Ausgangssperre? Is it because, as in English, it does not imply compulsion?
Ausgangssperre in German implies compulsion. Does not imply a reason. It could be military, civil unrest, dangerous animals, disease, weather, and so on. Does not imply a certain time of the day. Has a negative vibe to it. I would suggest that confinement, as was originally suggested to you, fits the bill perfectly. Wiktionary defines confinement in part as the state of being confined. In turn, the relevant meanings of confined are defined as not free to move, limited, narrow, restricted. It implies compulsion, solitary confinement, etc. Does not imply a reason. Confinement can be for many different reasons. Does not imply a time of day, in fact it suggests a continuous period. Has a negative vibe to it, see solitary confinement, restraints, etc. A patient can be confined with restraints, straitjacket, strapped to a bed, etc., or merely isolated from other people. Although there is an overtone of prisons, it is not the only common feeling of the word.
A recent headline in the New York Times was, "Chemical plant explosion in Spain. Prompts order to stay inside." This URL. This seems to me to be a very close equivalent for the German Ausgangssperre, including all the implied connotations and flexibility listed in the original question here. Other examples of this English usage can be found by Googling order to stay inside. More specific locations may instead be given as indoors or at home rather than inside.
If you want to support the channel, please consider liking and subscribing.